Greetings and welcome to part one of chapter 6, Designing a Motivating Work Environment. The first major topic that I'll be talking about today is job design. Now, before I dive into this, there's a critical statement that I want you to make note of. Here goes. The most important thing that a leader can do to help their employees choose to be motivated is to give them a good job. I'll say it again. The most important thing that a leader can do to help their followers choose to be motivated is to give them a good job. That is the secret to motivation. Well, if this is true, then a logical follow-up question is, well, what constitutes a good job? I'm going to be talking about that in this narrated PowerPoint. Again, we'll start by talking about job design. Why does it matter? Well, job design influences people's motivation. It influences their job satisfaction. It affects whether they will be absent and also whether they will turn over. You should recognize we're talking about 3 of the really important dependent variables that we care about in organizational behavior. And motivation as a subset of performance, oh yeah, basically we're talking about 4 of the 6 important dependent variables. So let's do a little walk back in history to something called scientific management. This is around the turn of the last century, a guy named Frederick Taylor. The basic ideas behind scientific management were pretty simple. And you see them in the slide here. What needs to happen in order for people to be really effective at their jobs, to perform at a high level, is we need to break down jobs into their simplest components and then assign tasks so that each employee performs a select number of those tasks in a repetitive manner. The idea is that by doing something over and over and something simple, over and over and over, you'll get really good at it. You'll become incredibly efficient at it. That was the basic idea. Now, does that actually work? When we specialize jobs to the point where people just have a few tasks, and that's what they do over and over repetitively, does this in fact lead to a high level of efficiency? Give that some thought. What do you think? Well, part of what should occur to you as you think about specializing a job, imagine, for example, working on an assembly line where you just do a couple things all day long. And back around the turn of the last century, we'd have been talking about 14-hour days, not 8-hour days, 14-hour days without prescribed breaks. Those limitations on how long an employer could work you and to do so without breaks, all of these things changed because of unions, not because management decided that in fact it was better to make sure that people weren't working themselves to death 6 days a week, 14 hours a day, no breaks or almost no breaks and very short breaks, doing repetitive, boring jobs. Think about what happens when you get bored. I know that when I get bored, if I'm doing something repetitively, it's really easy to start daydreaming, thinking about anything but that thing. Let me tell you about a job that I had many years ago. It was while I was working for a restaurant, and in between the busy times, we would go in the back and we would prep food. And when we had prepped pretty much everything and we were down to still needing to kill time because we didn't have enough customers yet, we would have to do what was called sorting the beans. One of the things that we made at this restaurant was homemade chili, and we sold so much of it that we purchased the raw materials for this chili in great bulk. We would get the beans, for example, you can like kidney beans basically, or black beans. I don't remember what kind they were, it doesn't matter. We would get them dry in huge bags, and those huge bags would be dumped into essentially very large garbage containers. Well, one of the issues with those bags of beans is that every once in a while there would be a small pebble mixed in with the beans, and it wasn't immediately obvious. It took some careful review of the beans in order to spot those pebbles and pull them out. And you can imagine why this was so important. Think about yourself having a nice bowl of chili, biting in, breaking a tooth or a crown or some other dental work because you've just bit down on a rock. Not so great for business, right? So here's what we would do. We would stand at a stainless steel counter. To our right, we'd have the big garbage can full of dried beans. To our left, we'd have another large garbage can. That was where the beans were going to be headed after we had scooped them out of the first, spread them out on the stainless steel counter in front of us, and then sifted through them, looking for pebbles. We'd find a pebble, setting it off to the side, obviously, and then we would scoop. Okay, so you've got the idea. How long do you think you could do that job before you'd get bored? 10 minutes? 20 minutes, maybe? It didn't take very long. And again, then what happens? People start to daydream. People start chatting with their coworkers. People start making mistakes. Intuitively, it would seem to make sense that as you specialize a job, people would become more efficient at it. And that's true up to a point, up to the point where they become bored. And then, in fact, they can make more mistakes and become less efficient. As a result, it became clear that job specialization, at least as it was originally designed by those in the scientific management school, wasn't really ideal. And so people started to come up with alternatives. You see a couple on this slide. One, job rotation, basically where we move people from one boring job to another boring job after some interval. It could be every week, it could be every month, it could be every 3 months. The idea was if we move people around among boring jobs, they'll get less bored overall. Okay? So reduces the monotonous aspects of a job, creates an effective way for people to acquire new skills, increases organizational flexibility because now managers can assign people to different areas because people have different skills, and allows for the transfer of knowledge. So the best practices that are learned in one department might make their way into another department because people are rotating between those departments. Another way of dealing with too much job specialization is what's known as job enlargement. Here, what we basically do, let's say instead of the person having 3 boring tasks to do, now they have 6 boring tasks to do. So we add to the variety of tasks. This, at least theoretically, reduces boredom and monotony and basically has the same benefits as job rotation. A third option is what's called job enrichment. Essentially, what we're doing here is we are adding to a person's tasks, but that's not what's key. What's key is that those new tasks come with more authority. So the person has more control over how they perform their own tasks. They can decide. They don't have to get someone higher above to sign off on things, for example. Giving people more authority, enriching their jobs, reduces turnover and absenteeism, increases productivity and efficiency, remember, performance. Oh, yeah, and it reiterates that, again, can increase performance. So efficiency and effectiveness, because people basically feel like they're being treated as an adult, as someone who is respected and needed for their brains in addition to their brawn. Now, the job characteristics model. This is my favorite motivational theory. Of all the theories that help us to understand why people do what they do in organizations, this is my favorite. And here's why. This model, better than any other model I know, shows us what has to happen if we're going to give people a good job. The 5 characteristics that this model names are essential to someone having a good job. Without these 5 characteristics, it can be argued pretty successfully that a person does not have a good job, and therefore we should not be surprised if the person is not highly motivated. Turn that around. When a person has a job that has these 5 characteristics in abundance, more likely than not, they will be highly motivated. So what are these core job characteristics? They're listed for you on this slide, and I'll talk about them just a bit more on the next. They are skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. When those core job characteristics are present, it leads to people experiencing 3 critical psychological states: meaningfulness, responsibility, and knowledge of results. This all leads to the outcomes that you see on the right: higher motivation, higher performance, higher satisfaction, lower absenteeism, lower turnover. So all these positives, these super important dependent variables. And while I haven't seen the research on it, I'll bet that when a person's job has these 5 core job characteristics in abundance, I'll bet they're less likely to engage in deviant behavior. That's the 5th dependent variable that we care about. And I'll bet they're more likely to engage in organizational citizenship behavior, our 6th dependent variable. So as I said, this slide right here is quite possibly one of the most important that you'll see when we talk about organizational behavior concepts, because here is where we see what it takes to create a good job. So what exactly are those core job characteristics? I'll use myself as an example. I use my job as an example to illustrate. Skill variety, as it says here, this is the extent to which the job requires a person to use multiple high-level skills. Well, I'm very fortunate in my job as a professor at St. Norbert College. I get to use all kinds of higher level skills, including my critical thinking skills, my problem solving skills, my creativity skills, my writing skills, my public speaking skills, lots. A professor's job is, frankly, a great job. And part of what makes it a great job is that we do get to use a lot of skills. We get to invent things. We get to collaborate with other people. We're in an environment where learning is treasured, where it's prioritized, where coming up with new ideas is rewarded. So we get to use lots of different skills. We also have the opportunity to use all of our empathic skills to relate not only to students, but to our colleagues and people in the community, and to share what we know and also learn from all of those people. So again, lots and lots of high-level skills. The second characteristic is task identity, defined here as the degree to which a person is in charge of completing an identifiable piece of work from start to finish. Again, my particular job at St. Norbert College has me teaching this course, the Intro to Organizational Behavior course, often taken by students as sophomores, sometimes as freshmen, sometimes a little bit later. Essentially, I'm getting to see students in business and accounting early on, typically in their college career. And then I get to see them later as well when they graduate. And even before that, just a bit before that, with upper level courses like the Advanced Organizational Behavior class and the strategic management capstone. I get to see people change, people be transformed through their educational experiences. My job has a high degree of task identity. It also has a high degree of task significance, defined here as whether a person's job substantially affects other people's work, health, or well-being. It's a privilege to be a professor, to have the opportunity to make a positive difference in people's lives. And while I would never say that I have done that for every single student I've ever had, that would be the height of arrogance, wouldn't it? I do know that for at least some students, my interaction with them has made a significant difference for them, whether it's through the courses that I teach, the advising that I do, me involving students in research. They're all different ways that I engage with students. And hopefully, I've had positive influence on more than a few. That means pretty high task significance. The next is autonomy. Autonomy is all about the degree to which a person has the freedom to decide how to perform their tasks. A professor's job pretty much always comes with a high degree of autonomy. At St. Norbert College, as a full professor, I decide for my classes what books I'll use, what topics I'll cover, how I'll cover those topics, what assignments I might develop, how I might grade those assignments. In other words, I decide everything about the course. And it's not just me, Lucy Arndt, doing this. It's all of the faculty members at St. Norbert College. This is a very typical model. The reason that that's okay, or a very typical model, is that as professors, we are supposed to be experts in our field. We have received a high degree of training in whatever our field happens to be, and through our research, we continue to stay current in our field. Therefore, it makes the most sense for us to be the ones deciding what happens in the courses that we teach. Again, presumably, those are in fields for which we are experts. So we have this enormous amount of autonomy. Finally, feedback. This is defined as the degree to which students know how effective the degree to which people know how effective they are at work. I'll bet you can think of a number of ways that I, as a professor, get feedback. Take a moment and think about that. One way for sure is through course evaluations. At St. Norbert College, typically we administer what we call the SOOTs. And I will get the results of those a few weeks after the end of the semester. Those, of course, are very interesting, but they don't give real-time feedback. Instead, one of the mechanisms for real-time feedback would be exams and assignments. How well you do on those tells me how good of a job I'm doing. If a significant number of students struggle to do well on an exam, that tells me I'm not doing such a hot job, right? That makes a lot of sense. One of the issues with trying to teach online, especially this asynchronous stuff where we're not in a room together at the same time, is that I lose out on a valuable form of feedback. When I'm in the room with my students, it's usually pretty easy for me to tell if people are getting it. You'll hear me say things during our synchronous sessions where I'll say, is everybody with me? Are we all tracking? That's me trying to get feedback to see, am I making sense? Are my examples useful? Should I give another example or should I move on? As I said, normally I'm getting all kinds of feedback. Now, I've just talked about the teaching parts of my job, but I also get feedback on my research. When I finish writing an article for publication and I send it to be reviewed, I get feedback on the quality of that, including typically lots of suggestions for what I need to change in order to make it better. I could go on, but I think you get the point. With all 5 core job characteristics, a professor's job is going to come out pretty darn well. Now, unfortunately, this is not true for all jobs. I would argue it should be. It really should be. It is, in fact, entirely responsible to structure, maybe not all, but most jobs, so that they will be high on these dimensions. Now, when you take the first three, so that would be skill variety, task identity, and task significance. Together, those three core job characteristics yield the meaningfulness psychological state. In other words, when a person gets to use a lot of skills, when they get to see what they're doing from beginning to end, and when they know that what they do matters, they view their work as meaningful. It's important. If we're not there to do the job, the organization, the people it serves, they suffer. With autonomy, where the person is making decisions about what they do and how they do it, when that is present to a high degree, people feel responsibility. They feel ownership of the outcomes. Because I'm the one writing the exams, delivering the lectures, if my students don't do well on an exam, I own part of that. Not all of it, of course. I mean, y'all have to do your part as well, right? But part of that absolutely 100% rests on my shoulders. There is no one else to hold accountable, just you and me. And once I've given thought to what you've done, well, everything else is on me. In fact, if students don't do well on an exam, I don't think about what you all have or haven't done first. I think about what I have or haven't done. And I think about what I could have done differently. I worry less about what you might have been able to do differently. I'm not in control of you. You are. Instead, I'll really focus on, should I have given more examples? Should I have thought more carefully about those examples? I think you get the point. And finally, when people receive feedback, that gives them knowledge of results. They know if they're on track. They know if they're doing a good job. They know if they need to make course corrections, if they need to change up what they're doing. One of the things that we can do is calculate the motivating potential of any job using the equation that you see in that nice box. MPS stands for motivating potential, right? Motivating potential score. And it's derived in the following way. We add up skill variety, task identity, and task significance. Okay, so you end up with some number, let's say 0 to 9 on a scale of 0 to 9. Then you multiply that. I should say, first you divide by 3, okay? So you can normalize the number. And then you multiply that by the score 0 to 9 that you would give for autonomy and the score 0 to 9 that you would give for feedback. So let's say I was evaluating my job as an SNC professor. I would do 9 plus 9 plus 9 divided by 3. That's equal to 9 times 9, which is 81, times 9, which is whatever that number is a big number, okay? Tells you my job has a very high motivating potential score. Now, if I think back to one of the jobs I had as a college student, for example, when I waited tables, let's see, skill variety, I would have to give that on a scale of 0 to 9 about a 3. Task identity, again, on a scale of 0 to 9, maybe a 3. So 3 plus 3. And then task significance. Well, given the way that most people tend to view servers, I probably give that a 3 as well. Now, do I think it's only worth a 3? No, I think the people who wait on us in restaurants, their job should be seen as far more significant than most people see them. But the reality is people don't see them as more significant. So I'd go 3 plus 3 plus 3 divided by 3 is 3. Autonomy on a scale of 0 to 9, well, I couldn't really decide much of how I did things, what I did or how I did it. So my autonomy was pretty low. I'd give it like a 2. So 3 times 2, 6. And then feedback. Oh, we got feedback. Number 1 in the form of tips. So I'd say the feedback was actually pretty high. That mechanism was pretty straightforward. Let's give it a 6. So 3 times 2 times 6. 3 times 2, 6 times 6, 36. That's way different than the number generated for my job as an SNC professor. Now, does this stuff matter to everybody? Well, one's growth need strength affects how much of these characteristics people want or need. I would guesstimate that for most of you, your growth need strength is pretty high. You want to keep learning and growing as you go forward in your career. I mean, otherwise, why would you be in college, right? So these things will matter to you. In fact, they matter for most people, not everybody, and not at every point in our life. But for most people, especially folks who are going into their careers and who are in, let's say, the first few phases of their careers, this stuff actually really matters. Now, what if you're not getting the feedback you want in a job? Well, some tips. Very first, if you're not receiving enough feedback on the job, it's better to seek it instead of trying to guess how you're doing. Because of all the biases that we have, if you remember from chapter 3, self-effacing bias, for example, we have a tendency to not see ourselves as other people do. Hence, we really do need that feedback from others. We need to be genuine in our desire to learn, to be open to the negative as well as the positive. We need to work on developing good relationships with our managers to the extent that doing so is possible. Hint, it isn't always. There's a reason why when most people leave their jobs, it's because of their bosses. Not all bosses are good bosses. And I'll bet you knew that already. We also should consider finding trustworthy peers who can share information with us regarding our performance. People who won't stab us in the back, people who we believe know what we're doing and have a good sense of what we could do better. And finally, when we do get feedback, to be gracious about it, to accept it as it is offered, recognizing that not everyone is a diplomat, that the negative can be, in fact, sometimes more important than the positive feedback we get. So that's it for the job characteristics model. The last part of part 1 deals with goal setting. And I'm going to move pretty quickly here, primarily because I know that you already know a lot about goal setting. We'll start with this slide. Goal setting is one of the most influential theories of motivation. It can improve our motivation, our performance, and our satisfaction. And in the real world, thousands of companies use it in some form. In order for goals to work, and when I say that, what I mean by to work is to motivate, to help us choose to be motivated, they need to meet these 5 characteristics. We talk about setting SMART goals. Goals that are specific, measurable, aggressive, realistic, and time-bound. A common goal that people will have in their lives in general has to do with their weight. It could be that they want to gain weight. It could be that they want to lose weight. Whatever. It could be that they want more muscle. It could be that they want to be toned. Again, something with their bodies. People will commonly say things like, I need to lose weight. And again, we could flip that around to, I need to gain weight. I need to lose weight. And 6 months later or a year later, they wonder why they haven't. And it's because the phrase, I need to lose weight, doesn't fit these criteria. It's not specific. It's not measurable. It's not aggressive. It's not realistic. It's not time-bound. Let me give you instead an example of a SMART goal. Last year, right around this time, maybe a couple weeks earlier, I decided that I wanted to lose weight in time for my second son's wedding, which was at the end of August. I decided that I wanted to weigh a specific amount. I set a specific weight goal. It was substantially less than what I weighed when I set the goal. I'm not going to give you the numbers. That doesn't really matter. But I assigned actual numbers. So in my goal statement, I said, I want to lose X number of pounds by August 1st. I said August 1st because that would be the last time I could get fitted for a dress for my son's wedding. Now, here's why that worked. And by the way, it did. Again, it was specific. I had a very specific number that I had identified. It was easy to measure. Every day I got on the scale. I even bought myself a portable scale that I could take with me when I traveled so that I could track my weight every morning. It was an aggressive goal. I hadn't lost that amount of weight ever over any significant period of time. And now I was deciding to do it. It was going to be April, May, June, July, just over 4.5 months. So it was pretty aggressive. At the same time, I reasoned that it was a realistic goal. I calculated that I would need to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week, knowing that occasionally I would slip, but 1 to 2 pounds a week. And according to most people who talk about weight loss, that's considered realistic. And then finally, I had a deadline. I time bound it. So it wasn't at some point I hope to weigh that amount. I had a very specific date in mind. And guess what? It worked. It worked great. Why did it work? Well, first of all, that particular goal was very energizing. On any given day, I could say to myself, okay, I am working to look a certain way by the time my son gets married. I wanted to be able to look a certain way in the dress that I had chosen. Smart goals help to give us direction. On any given day, when I would look with longing at some snack, I could say to myself, nope, I have to make a different choice. Remember, direction is all about choice. Third, they provide challenge. I knew it wouldn't be super easy. I knew it would be challenging, and I know myself. I'm a person with a high need to achieve. So setting the goal the way I did, again, specific, measurable, aggressive, realistic, time bound, was just the right amount of challenge. And finally, it made me think outside the box. Besides watching what I was eating, I also got into the habit of taking long walks, which helped me to think about not only that particular goal, but all the goals I had for my life. Under what conditions are goals more effective? Well, when we're getting feedback, hence why having a scale was so important. It helped me to know that I was in fact making progress. I also subscribed to an app that helped me to track my food intake. It also did something else for me. It gave me advice about things I should be thinking about as I was making progress toward my goal. One needs to have the ability to accomplish a goal. People need to have the skills, knowledge, all those abilities to reach their goals. Otherwise, people will feel helpless as though the goal is not within their reach. And finally, the more committed a person is to a goal, the greater the likelihood that they'll actually achieve the goal. I really wanted to achieve that goal. Honestly, not just because I wanted to look good for my son's wedding, but also because I wanted to feel better. I wanted to know that if my granddaughters wanted me to go to the park with them and go down the slides and swing on the swings and run all over the place and play soccer and whatever else, I wanted to know that I could do all of that. This meant I had to be in better shape. So I was highly committed to the goal that I had set. Potential downsides, especially in organizational settings, when one sets a very specific, measurable, aggressive, realistic, and time-bound goal, one's learning can decrease because one becomes so focused. That's the third thing that's mentioned. Single-mindedness develops, where we sort of lose sight of all the other things that matter. We get so zeroed in on trying to accomplish that goal that our adaptability can decline. Our adaptability meaning our ability to switch it up, to flex, to respond to whatever happens to be going on in our lives outside of that goal. We can also have ethical problems. For example, when to meet a quota, which is a great example of a specific goal, people cheat because the consequences of failing to meet the goal might be so great that they decide it's worth taking the risk of cheating, of doing something illegal, inappropriate, in order to meet that goal. So goal setting is not all positive. There is absolutely the potential for some negatives. And that brings us to the end of part 1 for chapter 6.